My name is Rachel Monroe, and I was 36 when my mother told my 9-year-old daughter that our apartment belonged to her uncle now. I was inside a hospital sterilization room when it happened. No phone, no windows, no way to know that my mother had used her building access code to empty our closets, change our lock, and place my daughter's purple backpack beside the service elevator. Myra came home from her science club at 4:12, entered the code she had used for 6 years, and watched the keypad flash red. My mother opened the door, wearing my kitchen apron. She said, "Your mother gave the apartment back. Housing goes to the family that needs it most." Then she told Myra to sit in the lobby until I learned to cooperate. What my mother did not know was that our lease was still active. My rent had cleared that morning. The building system had recorded exactly who changed the lock, and the city had already received an application claiming my daughter lived with my brother. If your own mother erased your child from her home and called it helping family, tell me in the comments whether you would confront her first or let the people who funded the building ask the questions. I let them ask. 11 days later, my mother stood in the Riverton Commons community room expecting to receive a housing service award. Instead, the city monitor asked her why a child listed in apartment 4C had been found crying in the lobby while her uncle's name was being added to the same unit. Riverton Commons was a 62-unit apartment building in Dayton owned by a nonprofit called Harbor Family Housing. It was not public housing, and it was not free. The rents were reduced because the city had helped finance the renovation, but every tenant had a lease, income rules, and an annual review. I moved into apartment 4C after Myra's father left when she was 2. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen so narrow that Myra could open the oven or the refrigerator, but not both. It was also the first home where nobody could tell me to leave because they were angry. I paid $986 a month. The payment came out of my checking account on the 3rd business day. I knew the exact amount because there had been years when a difference of $12 decided which bill weighted. I worked in sterile processing at St. Anne's Medical Center. Most people never see that department. We cleaned, inspected, assembled, and tracked the instruments used in operating rooms. If a tray was missing 1 clamp, a surgery waited. If a package seal failed, the whole set came back. The work trained me to respect boring facts. A tray number, a timestamp, a broken seal. Small things could protect a person who would never know my name. My mother, Linda, had worked at Riverton Commons since the building reopened. Her title was Resident Services Coordinator. That sounded like she planned holiday parties and helped people fill out forms. She did those things. She also controlled the master key cabinet, scheduled the moving elevator, updated emergency contacts, and sat beside the property director during annual occupancy reviews. For years, I thought having her in the building made Myra and me safer. My younger brother, Kyle, thought it made the building family property. Kyle was 32. His wife, Amber, had left him in February and taken their son to Indiana. Kyle stopped paying rent on his own apartment after that because he said there was no point paying for rooms his family was not using. His landlord disagreed. By May, he had an eviction filing and nowhere stable to go. My mother began calling me with solutions. At first, she wanted Kyle to use my couch for 2 weeks. I said no. Kyle had stayed with us once before. 2 weeks became 4 months. He ate Myra's school snacks, borrowed my car without asking, and told his friends my address was a place where they could meet after midnight. The day I found a stranger asleep in Myra's beanbag chair, I told Kyle to leave. My mother called me selfish for 6 months. This time, she said Kyle had changed. I said that was good and still said no. Then she suggested I move into a 1-bedroom unit on the 1st floor so Kyle could have 4C. I reminded her that Harbor's rules did not let tenants trade units based on family preference. She used the sentence I had heard my whole life. Housing goes to the family that needs it most. By family, she meant Kyle. Myra and I were expected to count as people only after his problem had been solved. I told my mother I would not move my daughter out of the only home she remembered because Kyle had chosen not to pay his rent. She said I was making a permanent decision over a temporary setback. I told her the answer was still no. After that, she became pleasant. That should have worried me more. She brought Myra a new set of colored pencils. She asked whether my bank information had changed for the lease renewal. She offered to update my emergency contact form because the old one still listed her. I said I would handle it at the annual review. She smiled and said there was no rush. The lockout happened on a Thursday in June. St. Anne's had 2 emergency surgeries added to the afternoon schedule, so our department needed 6 extra instrument trays turned around. At 1:30, I entered decontamination. Before I went in, I texted my mother. Myra's science club bus would reach Riverton at 4:10. I asked her to watch the lobby camera and make sure Myra got upstairs. My mother replied with a heart. That was the last message I saw for 5 hours. Phones were not allowed in the processing area. I put mine in a locker, changed into hospital scrubs, covered my hair, and went through the controlled door. At 2:06, while I was checking a laparoscopic tray, my mother entered apartment 4C with a master credential. At 2:11, Kyle came through the loading entrance with a borrowed pickup. At 2:18, my mother reserved the service elevator under the reason tenant voluntary transfer. I learned those times later. Myra only knew what she saw. Her bus dropped her beside the main entrance at 4:12. She came through the lobby carrying a cardboard model of the water cycle and went upstairs. The keypad rejected her code twice. She thought she had pressed the numbers wrong. On the 3rd try, the door opened from inside. My mother stood there in the blue apron Myra had printed with yellow handprints in kindergarten. Behind her, our couch was turned on its side. Kyle was unscrewing the legs from Myra's desk. Black trash bags filled the hall. Myra asked what they were doing. My mother told her we had moved. Myra said no, because 9-year-olds understand their own bedrooms. My mother said I had signed the apartment back to the building and agreed to take a smaller unit. That was false. Myra tried to step inside. My mother blocked the doorway. Then she said, "Uncle Kyle needs a home for his boy. Housing goes to the family that needs it most." Myra asked where she was supposed to sleep. My mother pointed toward the elevator. "Your mother will figure that out when she stops being difficult." Then she handed Myra the purple backpack, closed the door, and changed the inside latch. Myra went downstairs because my mother told her to wait there. She sat behind the fake plant beside the mailboxes. The lobby attendant had gone to help a tenant whose bathroom ceiling was leaking. People walked past. Some assumed Myra was waiting for me. At 4:47, Kyle carried her white bookshelf through the lobby. Myra stood and told him it belonged in her room. He said, "Not anymore." Then he loaded it into the truck. At 5:03, Mrs. Alvarez from 3B came home with groceries. She had known Myra since we moved in. She saw the backpack, the cardboard science model, and my daughter trying not to cry. Mrs. Alvarez asked where I was. Myra said Grandma had given our home to Uncle Kyle. Mrs. Alvarez did not tell her that sounded impossible. She sat down beside her and called me. My phone rang in a locker 3 floors below an operating room. Then she called the hospital switchboard. That call reached my supervisor at 5:21. He came through the controlled door and told me there was a family emergency in my building. I remember stripping off my gloves. I remember asking whether Myra was hurt. He said he did not know. I ran to the locker so fast, I left one shoe cover behind. There were 14 missed calls. 6 from Mrs. Alvarez. 3 from the Riverton front desk. 2 from Myra's school. 1 from Kyle. 2 from my mother. Her first voicemail said I needed to stay calm. Her second said the change was already entered, and there was no point embarrassing everyone. I called Mrs. Alvarez. She said Myra was with her in 3B, eating rice and beans, and holding the cardboard water cycle in both arms because she would not set it down. I asked whether my mother had touched her. She said no. I asked whether Kyle was still in my apartment. She said yes. Then I called the Riverton property director, Martin Cho. He did not answer. I called the after-hours maintenance number. The technician said his screen showed apartment 4C in turnover status with a management lockout. I asked who authorized it. He said Linda Monroe had entered the request. I told him I was the active tenant. He went quiet. Then he said he would call Martin. I drove home in hospital scrubs. When I reached the 4th floor, my mother, Kyle, and Amber were inside my apartment. Amber had come back from Indiana that afternoon. That explained the urgency. Kyle had convinced her he had secured a stable home at Riverton. My mother had decided my lease was the quickest way to make that statement true. The door opened before I touched it. My mother stepped into the hallway and pulled it nearly closed behind her. She said, "Do not start." I looked through the gap. Myra's framed school picture was face down on the counter. Kyle's television was against my living room wall. Amber was measuring the window. I asked where my belongings were. My mother said the important things had been placed in storage, and the rest had gone to the community donation room. I asked what I had signed. She said Martin had approved a compassionate transfer. I knew Martin well enough to know that was unlikely. I asked to see the form. She folded her arms. "Rachel, housing goes to the family that needs it most. Kyle is trying to put his marriage back together. You have 1 child. You can manage in less space." I said, "Open my door." Kyle came into the hall. He told me not to make Amber leave again. I asked whether Amber knew he was standing inside an apartment leased to me. Amber looked at him. That was the first crack. My mother stepped closer and lowered her voice. She said the system already showed my transfer. She said fighting would put my housing history at risk. She reminded me that reduced rent buildings did not like difficult tenants. That was the threat. Accept the theft, or she would use the same building system to make me look unstable. I did not shout. I did not push past her. I took out my phone and photographed the apartment number, Kyle's television through the open door, and the black bag with Myra's name written on masking tape. Then I said, "I need the name of the unit I supposedly transferred to." My mother blinked. She had expected anger. She had not expected a question with 1 answer. She said 1F. Apartment 1F was a studio used for visiting social workers. It had no bedroom and was not approved for a parent with a child. I asked when I had accepted it. She said Tuesday. On Tuesday, I had worked from 6:00 in the morning until 6:30 at night. St. Anne's had recorded every entry and exit through our secure department. I nodded once. My mother mistook that for surrender. She told Kyle to finish before dark. I went downstairs to Myra. She ran into me, so hard the cardboard water cycle folded between us. The first thing she said was, "I told Grandma I live here." I held her face and said, "You do." She asked why her shelf was in Kyle's truck. I said, "Because they moved it without permission. That is their mistake, not your new life." Mrs. Alvarez stood at her kitchen counter, pretending not to cry. I thanked her. Then I called Martin Cho again. This time, he answered. He sounded breathless. He said he had just seen the turnover entry and had not approved it. I asked whether my lease was active. He checked. It was. The June rent had cleared at 8:03 that morning. There was no signed move-out notice. There was no approved transfer. There was only an internal note entered by my mother saying the tenant had surrendered 4C and accepted 1F. Martin told me not to confront anyone. I said the confrontation had already happened. He said he was coming to the building with the board's facilities manager. 40 minutes later, Martin stood in the fourth-floor hallway with Mr. Dorsey from facilities and a security officer. My mother tried to greet them as coworkers. Martin asked her for the signed surrender form. She said it was being scanned. He asked for the paper copy. She said I had taken it. I held up both hands. I was still wearing hospital scrubs. I had no purse. I had left work with my phone and car key. Martin asked me one question. Did you surrender this apartment? I said no. He told Kyle, Amber, and my mother to step out. Kyle refused. He said his son was arriving the next morning, and his mother had promised the unit. Mr. Dorsey said a promise from a staff member was not a lease. Kyle looked at my mother. She said Harbor would fix the paperwork later. Martin answered, Number Harbor is fixing the occupancy now. The security officer waited while Kyle unplugged his television. Amber picked up her measuring tape and did not look at him. They had been in my apartment for less than 4 hours. It still looked like a burglary after they left. Half the kitchen cabinets were empty. Myra's bed had been taken apart. My work shoes were in a donation bin. 3 family photographs were missing. The refrigerator had been cleared because my mother said food could not transfer between units. My couch had a black scrape down one side. Martin restored my door code at 7:36. That was the first fact my mother could not soften into a family misunderstanding. The lease was active, the rent was paid, the transfer was fake. It should have ended there. It did not. Martin told my mother to turn over her master credential and leave the office pending review. She began crying. Not about Myra in the lobby. About the humiliation of being escorted past residents who knew her. She pointed at me and said I was willing to cost her a 17-year career over a misunderstanding. I looked at Myra's mattress leaning against the wall. I said, You changed a child's lock. My mother said, For 3 hours. Mrs. Alvarez had followed us upstairs. She answered from the hall. A child only needs one locked door to know she was not considered. My mother stopped crying long enough to glare at her. Then she handed Martin the credential. Myra and I slept in the apartment that night. I reassembled her bed at 10:40 with instructions open on my phone and 2 screws left over. Mrs. Alvarez brought sheets because ours had gone to the donation room. Myra asked whether Grandma could change the code again. I showed her the screen where Martin had removed my mother's access. She asked whether screens could lie. That question hurt more than the lockout. I told her screens could hold bad information when people entered it, but every change left a name and a time. She asked whether Grandma's name was there. I said yes. Myra nodded. Then she put a chair under the doorknob. I let it stay there. The next morning, Harbor Family Housing placed my mother on paid administrative leave. Martin gave me a printed letter confirming that my lease had never ended and that no eviction, surrender, or transfer would be reported in my tenant history. He offered to replace the damaged furniture. I asked for access to the donation room first. Most of our things were still there. Myra found her winter coat beneath 2 bags of towels. I found my mother's blue apron in a box marked household. She had taken it off before leaving. I folded it once and put it in a separate bag. I did not want it in my kitchen again. Kyle called while I was carrying the bookshelf back from the loading dock. He said Amber had returned to Indiana because I had made him look like a liar. I told him he had moved into my apartment without a lease. He said Mom had promised everything was handled. I asked whether he had seen a lease. He went quiet. Then he said, "You knew I needed this." I said, "Needing my home did not make it yours." He called me cold and hung up. By noon, I had enough to understand the lockout. I did not yet understand why my mother had entered Myra's name under Kyle's household. That came from a woman named Tasha Reed in Harbor's compliance office. Tasha called me Friday afternoon and asked whether Myra had changed guardianship or residence. I said no. She asked whether I had authorized Kyle to list Myra as a household member. I sat down on the loading dock. I told her to repeat the question. Tasha explained only what I needed to know. Riverton had received city funding for 8 family stability units. Those units were reserved for households with at least one minor child who were at immediate risk of homelessness. Apartment 4C was one of them. My household qualified because Myra lived with me. Kyle alone did not qualify. Kyle and Amber might have qualified with their son, but their son lived in Indiana and Amber had not agreed to move back. So an occupancy update had been submitted 3 days earlier listing Kyle as head of household and Myra as his dependent niece. The form said I had accepted employment housing near St. Anne's and asked Kyle to keep Myra through the school year. It also requested $7,800 in city transition support for furniture, deposits, and family stabilization. My mother had certified the change as resident services coordinator. That discovery changed the whole conflict. My mother had not only taken our apartment for Kyle, she had used my daughter to make him eligible for it. The lobby was not a side effect. Myra had to be pushed out of her own home so the system could pretend she had been transferred into Kyle's care. I asked Tasha whether money had been paid. She said the request was pending. I asked who else had seen it. She said the city housing monitor had flagged the household change because Myra's school address had not changed and because my rent payment arrived after the claimed surrender. The application had not moved forward. My mother's false note had not stayed inside the building. It had carried Myra's name into a city funding request. Tasha asked me to send a written statement. I kept it to 1 page. I did not describe my childhood. I did not explain Kyle. I did not call my mother a thief. I gave dates. My active lease. My rent payment. My work hours. Myra's school and home address. The time she was denied entry. The time my code was restored. Facts did not need help sounding bad. That evening, my mother left a voicemail. Her voice was calm again. She said Harbor had misunderstood a family arrangement and that I needed to correct the record before people lost jobs. Then she repeated her sentence. Housing goes to the family that needs it most, Rachel. You had somewhere to go. I did not. That was another lie. The studio in 1F had never been offered to me by anyone authorized to offer it. St. Anne's did not provide employee housing. My mother had invented both claims because they made the transfer look voluntary. I saved the voicemail. Not because it proved the lockout. The building system already did that. I saved it because it proved she still believed Kyle's need gave her the right to move Myra between households. On Saturday morning, Mrs. Alvarez knocked with a yellow envelope. Inside was a delivery receipt from Dayton Community Resale. She had found it stuck beneath the lobby desk. The receipt listed a pickup from apartment 4C at 3:15 on Thursday. It included Myra's bed frame, children's books, 1 white shelf, kitchenware, and 4 bags of clothing. The donor name was Linda Monroe. At the bottom, the driver had written, "Child returned before load complete. Staff instructed us to continue. I read that line twice. Mrs. Alvarez said the truck driver had looked uncomfortable when Myra tried to stop Kyle from taking the shelf. She had asked him to note what happened. That receipt put an outside witness inside the moment my mother later called a misunderstanding. Myra had come home. My mother had seen her. The removal continued. The driver, a man named Leon Price, agreed to speak with Harbor. He did not want attention. He simply said he had been told the tenant had moved voluntarily. When he saw a child insisting the books and bed were hers, he stopped loading and asked the building employee to confirm. My mother told him, "The child is confused. Her family has made a better plan." Leon wrote those words in his route notes because the situation felt wrong. Each new fact changed the conflict. The lease proved I had not left. The city application proved Myra's identity was used to qualify Kyle. The delivery receipt proved my mother kept clearing the apartment after Myra returned. Then the fourth proof arrived from the lobby camera. Riverton's cameras did not record sound, and I was grateful for that. I did not need to hear my daughter cry. The video showed Myra entering at 4:12. It showed Kyle carrying her shelf at 4:47. It showed Myra standing in front of him with both hands on the white frame. It showed my mother approach, remove Myra's hands, and guide her back toward the lobby chair. Then it showed my mother return to the elevator and hold the door for Kyle. At 5:05, Mrs. Alvarez sat beside Myra. At 5:16, the lobby attendant returned and saw them. At 5:42, I ran through the entrance in blue hospital scrubs. There was no dramatic image. That made it worse. It was an ordinary lobby. People checked mail. A delivery person carried flowers. A child sat beside a plastic plant while her home moved past her one piece at a time. Harbor's attorney asked whether I wanted the video preserved. I said yes. I also said Myra would not watch it. My daughter's pain did not need to become a presentation. The officials could rely on the access log, the route note, and the adults who were there. Myra was a child, not an exhibit. On Sunday, Kyle came to Riverton. His old code no longer opened the lobby. He called from outside and said he wanted his television stand. I told him it was with security because he had left it in my apartment. He asked me to come down. I said no. He stayed outside for 38 minutes. Then my mother arrived. They stood together near the front window and called me 6 times. I watched from 4C while Myra watered the basil plant from her classroom. My mother finally sent a text. "Fix this before Tuesday. You know what the award means to me." Tuesday was Harbor Family Housing's annual community meeting. I had forgotten. Every June, Harbor held the meeting in Riverton's community room. Residents heard building updates. The city compliance monitor reviewed funding requirements. Staff members received service awards. My mother was scheduled to receive a plaque for 17 years of resident support. She had planned the refreshments herself. Her name was printed on the program. That explained why she wanted the occupancy change completed before Thursday. By Tuesday, Kyle would have appeared to be the new family in 4C. Myra would have appeared to be under his care, and my mother would have stood before the building as the woman who prevented a father and child from becoming homeless. She had built the award story around my daughter. The lockout was not only about housing. It was about public credit. When you share this story or subscribe, do it for the quiet person who keeps being told a family lie is too small to put in writing, because the lie that removed us from one apartment was already being prepared for an entire room. Harbor did not cancel the meeting. The city monitor was already scheduled to attend, and the board chair said residents deserved an explanation for the management lockout. My mother's award was removed from the agenda. She came anyway, Monday night, she left a final voicemail. She said she would explain the family arrangement publicly if I forced her. She said people knew how much she had done for Myra. She said I should think carefully before humiliating the woman who had helped me get into Riverton. That last part was true. My mother had told me about the vacancy 8 years earlier. She had helped me collect the application documents. She had also spent 8 years treating that helped like a spare key to my life. I did think carefully. Then I attended the meeting. The Riverton community room held 54 folding chairs. All of them were filled. Residents stood along the back wall. Harbor's board sat at 2 tables near the front. The city sent Denise Walker, its housing compliance monitor. Tasha Reed sat beside Martin with a closed folder. Leon Price from the resale truck came in wearing his work shirt. Mrs. Alvarez sat on my left. Myra was not there. She spent the evening with her science teacher and 3 other children rebuilding the watercycle model that had been crushed when she ran into me. I wanted the room to protect her, not consume her. Kyle arrived with my mother. Amber was not with him. My mother wore a navy suit and the pearl pin Harbor had given her after 10 years. She carried a copy of the original meeting program with her awards still listed. She sat in the front row, as if the room belonged to her. Martin opened with the building updates. He kept them short. Then Denise Walker explained that the city had identified an unauthorized household change involving a family stability unit and a minor child. My mother raised her hand before Denise finished. She said there had been no unauthorized change. She said I had agreed privately to move closer to work and leave Myra with Kyle while he repaired his marriage. Kyle nodded. Denise asked whether they had a signed statement from me. My mother said family agreements were often verbal. Denise asked why the building record said a signed surrender form existed. My mother looked at Martin. She said he had lost it. Martin answered in front of everyone. I never received one. My mother said he was protecting himself. Denise did not argue. She asked Tasha for the tenant status. Tasha gave one plain conclusion. Apartment 4C had an active lease in my name. June rent was paid before the attempted change. No surrender, transfer, guardianship authorization, or household removal form had been signed by me. The room went quiet. My mother said paperwork sometimes lagged behind urgent family need. There was her logic. Need first, permission later, my child somewhere in between. Denise asked who changed my lock. Mr. Dorsey stated that the management system recorded my mother's credential at 2:06 and her staff login approving the new code at 2:09. My mother said she had done that for safety while furniture moved. Denise asked who scheduled the move. The service elevator record showed my mother again. My mother said I had requested it by phone. My supervisor from St. Anne, Paul Mercer, stood from the second row. I had not expected him. Harbor had asked the hospital only to confirm my work location. Paul said I entered a restricted processing area at 1:30 and did not leave until he brought me the emergency message at 5:24. He said personal calls were prohibited and the secure door record showed no exit. My mother turned toward me. You could have called before your shift. I said I did not request a move. It was the first time I spoke. I did not need more. Denise moved to the city application. She did not read the form aloud. She stated the consequence. Someone had used Myra's name to make Kyle appear eligible for a family stability unit and requested $7,800 in transition support. Several residents turned toward Kyle. He leaned forward. He said he never asked for city money. Tasha said the application used an email address connected to him and included a copy of his eviction filing. Kyle looked at my mother. You said it was moving help. My mother whispered for him to stop. That was the second crack between them. Denise asked Kyle where Myra lived. He said with me. She asked whether Myra had ever spent one night in his care. He said that was not the point. Denise said it was the only point that made him eligible. Kyle's face went red. My mother stood. She said the funding rules were too rigid for real families. She said Kyle was a father trying to reunite his household, and I was a hospital employee with good benefits who could rent anywhere. I made $47,600 the previous year. That did not let me rent anywhere. It let me pay my rent at Riverton, buy groceries, maintain a 10-year-old car, and keep $940 in savings on a good month. My mother knew that. She also knew none of it mattered. The issue was not whether I could survive what she did. The issue was that she did it. Mrs. Alvarez raised her hand. Denise recognized her. She said, I found Myra behind the plant with her school project. She said her grandmother told her the apartment was for Uncle Kyle now. My mother said children misunderstood adult conversations. Leon Price stood next. He did not describe the whole pickup. He said his crew stopped loading when Myra identified the furniture as hers. He said my mother personally instructed them to continue and called the child confused. Then he handed Denise the route note. My mother said a delivery driver did not understand the housing plan. Martin placed one photograph on the screen. It was not Myra crying. It was the lobby at 447. Kyle carried the white bookshelf. Myra stood in front of it. My mother's hand was around Myra's wrist, moving her aside. Nobody needed a timeline lecture. The room could see the choice. My mother looked at the screen and said, I was guiding her away from a moving hazard. Mrs. Alvarez answered, You guided the shelf to the truck. A few people made sounds under their breath. Denise asked everyone to remain quiet. Then she gave my mother one chance to explain why the official household update said I had accepted St. Anne's employee housing. My mother looked toward Paul. Paul said St. Anne's did not own employee apartments. My mother said I had told her I was considering a private unit near the hospital. I said, Name the building. She could not. For the first time, her face changed. Until then, she had treated every record as a technical obstacle, a missing page, a delayed signature, a rigid rule. Now the people she had served for 17 years were watching her fail to name the home she claimed I had chosen. She looked at Kyle. He stared at the floor. She looked at Martin. He closed his notebook. Then she looked at me. You could have made 1F work for a while. Denise said apartment. 1F was not approved as a permanent unit and could not house a child. My mother's answer came fast. Rachel always makes things work. That was the family role. Kyle needed. I managed. Myra disappeared from the calculation. I said, You left my daughter in a lobby so you could tell this room you had placed her with her uncle. My mother said she was safe. Mrs. Alvarez's chair scraped the floor. I touched her arm. I did not want the room to become loud enough for my mother to hide inside the noise. Denise asked my mother whether she had certified the city request. My mother admitted she had. She said she was trying to prevent homelessness. Denise asked whose homelessness. My mother pointed toward Kyle. Denise said, The application identifies Myra as the child at risk. That sentence ended the argument. My mother had used my daughter's name to claim a danger she had created herself. Harbor's board chair, Evelyn Grant, took over. She said the board had completed an emergency personnel review. The conclusions were short. My mother had used restricted staff access to alter an active tenant record. She had authorized a lock change and removal of property without management approval. She had submitted an unsupported household change involving a minor. She had certified a city funding request containing false residence and guardianship information. Then Evelyn made the facts visible. My mother's employment was terminated. Her building and tenant system access was revoked permanently. Harbor would repay the cost of every damaged or missing item in 4C. The city transition request was canceled and referred for further review. Kyle was removed from the Riverton waiting list for submitting false household information, subject to appeal through a reviewer who had no connection to my family. Harbor would also notify every tenant whose file my mother had edited in the previous 18 months and pay for an outside audit. That last consequence changed the room. A woman near the back raised her hand and said my mother had once removed her adult son as an emergency contact without asking. Another resident said a transfer request had disappeared after she refused to volunteer at a Harbor fundraiser. The story became bigger than me. My mother had treated Access like authority for years. I was simply the person who had made the pattern impossible to ignore. She turned to the residents. She said they knew her heart. She said she had delivered groceries, arranged rides, filled out school forms, and sat with people in emergency rooms. All of that may have been true. Good acts do not create a credit balance you can spend on someone else's child. Evelyn told her the meeting was not questioning every kind thing she had done. It was addressing the specific harm she had chosen. My mother picked up the old program. The line with her award title was visible from where I sat. She looked at me and said, "Are you happy now?" I was not happy. My daughter had put a chair beneath our doorknob for 4 nights. My family photographs were still missing. My brother had helped carry her bed toward a truck. There was nothing happy in that. I said I wanted her address to stay true. My mother shook her head. Housing goes to the family that needs it most. Denise closed the city file. Housing goes to the household with the legal right to occupy it, she said. My mother had repeated her sentence for years because nobody official had ever answered it. Now someone had. Security did not drag her out. Martin walked beside her while she returned the office keys she still had in her purse. At the door, Kyle asked what he was supposed to do. My mother stopped. For 1 second, I thought she might finally tell him the truth. That he had caused his own eviction. That his sister's home was not an emergency fund. That his mother could not transfer a child like a line on a form. Instead, she said, "Ask Rachel." I answered before he could turn. No. 1 word. No anger, no explanation. Just the first honest housing decision my family had heard all month. The meeting continued after they left. That mattered to me. Riverton was not my mother's stage, and it was not the scene of my revenge. It was a building where 61 other households needed their records to be accurate and their doors to stay theirs. The board approved 3 changes that night. No staff member could authorize a management lockout alone. Any household change involving a child required direct confirmation from the current leaseholder and a second compliance reviewer. Moving elevator reservations tied to a surrender had to match a signed tenant notice before a credential could be issued. The rules were not exciting. The result was, people went upstairs knowing one employee could no longer erase a home with a few entries. When I picked Myra up, she was sitting at her teacher's dining table painting blue arrows on the repaired water cycle model. She asked whether Grandma had got her award. I said no. She asked whether Grandma could enter our apartment. I said no. Then she asked the question I had been waiting for. Does the building know I live there? I took out the letter Martin had given me. It listed Rachel Monroe and Myra Monroe as the authorized occupants of apartment 4C. I did not read the legal language. I showed her our names and the apartment number. She traced 4C with one blue-painted finger. Then she asked to go home. The consequences took time after that. Harbor's outside review found that my mother had made 7 unauthorized contact changes and 3 unsupported transfer entries over 18 months. 2 had been corrected before anyone lost housing. 1 tenant received a rent credit after a promised transfer had been improperly canceled. The city referred my mother's funding certification for review. I gave 1 statement and then stepped back. I did not control what officials decided, and I did not pretend I did. Kyle appealed his waiting list removal. The independent reviewer denied it after comparing his email, the false household form, and his own statement at the community meeting. He moved into a weekly rate motel near the highway and blamed me in messages I did not answer. Amber filed for divorce. She sent me 1 email saying she had believed Kyle had a legitimate lease and that she was sorry Myra saw them inside. I believed the first part. I did not need the apology to become a relationship. My mother left 3 letters with relatives. The first explained how much she had sacrificed. The second said Harbor had used her as a scapegoat. The third said Myra would eventually understand that Grandma had tried to keep a family together. I returned all 3 unopened. Myra's therapist helped me understand that safety had to become physical before it became emotional. So we changed small things. Harbor installed a new lock system that required my approval before any non-emergency master entry. Martin gave me a printed entry report every Friday for 2 months. Nothing appeared except maintenance visits I had requested. We replaced the chair under the doorknob with a small battery alarm Myra could switch on herself. She used it for 3 weeks. Then one night she forgot. I noticed at 11:00 and almost turned it on for her. I did not. Forgetting was progress. The official correction arrived 6 weeks after the meeting. It was a corrected tenant history from Harbor and the city. It showed uninterrupted occupancy in apartment 4C, no surrender, no eviction, no adverse note, and no guardianship change. Harbor reimbursed $2,416 for the damaged couch, missing photographs, ruined food, and replacement bedding. They also paid the resale organization for the items it had already processed, so no charity lost money because of what my mother did. I deposited the reimbursement into an account in my name only. Then I printed the tenant history and put it in the same fireproof box as Myra's birth certificate. Not because I expected another lockout. Because I had learned that a home deserved records as careful as the instruments I assembled at work. The part that mattered most came later. In August, Riverton held a back-to-school night in the courtyard. Harbor asked residents to paint small wooden address tiles for their doors. Children chose colors. Adults handled the sealant. Myra painted ours purple with 2 yellow windows. At the top, she wrote 4C. Under it, she wrote Rachel plus Myra in letters that leaned uphill. She did not write Grandma. She did not write Uncle Kyle. She did not ask whether anyone else needed the apartment more. Martin mounted the tile beside our keypad. Then he handed Myra the work order and asked her to check whether the address was correct. She studied it with the seriousness of a person signing a treaty. "Both names," she said. Martin nodded. "Both names." Myra signed the bottom in purple marker. That evening, she carried her basil plant to the bedroom window. The plant had survived the lockout, though 2 stems had bent when Kyle moved the shelf. Myra tied them to wooden sticks and set the pot in the sun. Then she closed our door. She did not test the keypad 3 times. She did not put a chair under the knob. She looked at the purple tile, pressed 4C with 1 finger, and said, The building knows. I told her, yes. Inside, her white shelf stood against the wall again. The science model sat on top, repaired with too much tape and one new blue arrow. Our corrected tenant history was locked in the fireproof box. Our 2 names were outside the door, where nobody could move one beneath somebody else's household. My mother had tried to turn my daughter into a qualification on a form. The records stopped her. The people in the room made the stopping visible. And the final result was not an award, an apology, or a dramatic speech. It was a child closing her own front door without wondering whether it would open again.